All right. So, all right, we're going to get started, guys. Good morning. Good morning. It is 11:05. We are live on our Bergen County Partners Facebook group, where we have about 1,600 of our awesome KW Bergen County agents able to watch us. And we're also recording this, so we'll put it on all of our YouTube channels, just to make sure that you gentlemen get the right exposure. We love being in business with great people. First, I'd like to just introduce myself. My name is Marybeth Olive. I am the Director of Productivity in the Bergen County Partners group. I'm in 4 of the 5 offices. I kind of take care of, Sally, what would you call it? The launch agent, right? The launch agent.
People starting out.
People starting out in their first year, and some of our agents are repeat. They sign up and they continue coaching with us. But I've been with Keller Williams for 17 years. I started at 26 in Monmouth County, and I started as an agent. First 4 years, I was an agent. I grew my business by the book. This is my book, the MREA. And so I'm a student of the model. I took the leadership journey in 2008 to be a team leader. I stayed in that lane for about 12 years until Resham Sethi of the Ridgewood office pulled me out of it. And I decided to join forces with her and Sally in the Ridgewood team to be the productivity coach. And now we've grown that into 4 offices. So I'm excited to be here to get to know you all, to ask questions and to provide value to our agents. Sally, if you could just give a little introduction to who you are.
Sure. So I'm the broker of record in Ridgewood, Keller Williams. I've been a realtor for 30 years. I was an agent for most of those years until about 10 years ago, and with another company. And I was in on the ground floor of Keller Williams Village Square Realty, which I'm proud to say I've been here the whole time and watched it grow and helped it grow. And right now I'm broker of record, and I absolutely love what I do. I'm here to not just make sure people comply with what they're supposed to be doing, but as a resource with my 30 years of experience to help them through transactions.
Yeah, Sally is a wealth of knowledge, and we love having her with us, and so many agents respect her. And if it wasn't for you guys here, we wouldn't have contracts that get put together and closings. So I would like to turn it over to you. If we could just say a little something about yourself, what area you work in, maybe you specialize in something. One of you get the hard contracts, right? Somebody gets the easy ones. But if we could just start, Ian, you're to my right. If you could just start with you.
Sure. Hi. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Ian Linker. I've been a practicing attorney for about 22 years. Recently, I guess it was the end of 2019, started my own practice, focusing primarily on real estate, residential, and commercial. At the firm, we really do pride ourselves on responsiveness, communication, and collaboration with agents, lenders, and title companies. It's really very important to us, and we think that team approach really does help advance the ball and accomplish what everybody's trying to accomplish. And so it really sort of is what inspired me, to go out on my own and start this practice. And so, for the first several years of my career, I was a commercial litigator. And as part of that practice, I've learned to manage and identify risk. And so it really does sort of help me sort of lay that out for clients and the members of our team too, including agents and lenders, what the pitfalls and the challenges of a particular deal are going to be, and sort of think of creative ways to avoid those before they become a real problem. Obviously, it's not entirely possible to always avoid them, and you have to put out fires as they come up, but that is the goal.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ian. Responsiveness is absolutely important to our agents and our brokers. Frank, well, we got 2 Franks. Frank Uzi, if you'd unmute. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Good morning. Frank Uzi, real estate attorney. I have been practicing the area quite a while and had very fruitful and successful deals with many Keller Williams agents and as well as my colleagues on this panel. So I have an office in Montvale, and we also have an office in Staten Island. My firm concentrates specifically in real estate. We handle commercial and residential matters. I also have a background in construction, so we also do new construction and developers. We work with a lot of investors, you know, home builders, putting in subdivisions, house flippers, and everybody in between. And of course, you know, your standard transactions, I'll call it residential and commercial. So, you know, we service New York and New Jersey, and in that area, it's right now very busy. We have a lot of people transitioning from New York into New Jersey, so we're able to kind of handle both sides of those multi-state deals.
Awesome. Thank you. That's how I know your name, because I was in Staten Island for a while. I used to run the Staten Island Keller Williams.
Yes, I remember that.
You're in my system. I'm like, how do I know this Uzi guy? Frank Chambron.
Chambron, yes. Hi, good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Frank Chambron. I am a real estate attorney. I have an office in Paramus. I'm about to open a second office in Fort Lee, New Jersey, at the Bridge Plaza. I've been practicing now for 28 years. I was just told by my office manager that we just did our 10,000th closing. So
Yay,
I'm pretty proud of that.
congratulations.
The number has certainly swelled over the past few years because of the KW agents. You guys have been very good to me. I like to think it's because of my office staff, maybe not me, but the office staff. I have 5 full-time paralegals here. And I agree with the comments that Frank and Ian made, that responsiveness as a real estate attorney is number one. You can't be unavailable. We don't use voicemail. Everybody responds to email, off hours, weekends. So we realize the stress level that when a person cannot reach their attorney or someone in the office, what that causes in the middle of a transaction. Over the years, I've had a lot of different jobs that I think lend to my experience. I've been a councilman. I was, for about 10 years, I was the Paramus planning board attorney. So I have a great deal of land use experience. Currently, I am the municipal court judge for the borough of Maywood. So there's not too many aspects of a real estate closing that I haven't seen. I have in the past year closed an $80,000 condo to a $200 million multi-use property. So there's really nothing that my office can't handle. And I really love working with the KW agents, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a nice span, 80,000 to 200 million.
Yeah.
But I love that you mentioned about the land, the knowledge of the land, because, you know, that is a specialty that some people would not have, being on the planning boards, being a councilman, a little bit of knowledge there. Love it. Felix, how are you? Felix from Unger.
Felix Unger, that's right. How about Felix the cat? No?
Okay.
Anyway, thank you for having me. My background, I've been practicing for 26 years, both in New York and New Jersey. I stopped practicing in New York about 6 years ago. I moved my practice to New Jersey. I work from home. I'm a strict solo practitioner. I used to have a staff of like 25 people, but you know, that became too much of a headache. And to be honest with you, with this COVID thing and not having to commute to the city, I think it was probably the best decision I ever made. In terms of what I do, strictly, we handle either commercial, residential real estate, both on the purchase and sale side. We do estate planning, and we also handle some corporate work. All of those kind of go hand in hand. In 26 years, there's probably nothing that I haven't seen or done. Fluent in Russian, so I do have a lot of Russian clientele.
That's great.
I handle everything soup to nuts. I don't have any support staff. Today's day and age, everything is kind of automated, for lack of a better phrase, especially now that, you know, title companies such as, you know, Carnegie handle the settlement side of things on the, you know, when we handle purchases. So that certainly facilitates things and alleviates the need for a lot of support staff, in my opinion. But, you know, I try to keep it on the smaller and more efficient side, only because of just experiences that I've had in, you know, my practice. Been working with Keller Williams in Bergen County and in Passaic County for a few years now. Just as Frank Chambron said, great agents, great support, great team mentality, and, you know, that is the key to success. Like Ian started off with, having the team behind you is crucial, because the agents can only do X, the attorneys can only do Y, but, you need to have great bankers, you need to have decent inspectors, and, everybody's got to communicate and work together. So hopefully we can continue all of that, moving forward.
Awesome. So are you also licensed in New York still?
No.
Okay, so just Jersey business. So right
That's
now,
correct.
Frank Uzi, you're the only one here that's licensed in New York, I'm hearing.
No, I am too, actually,
Ian.
Marybeth. Yeah.
Okay,
New York
great.
and
So
I am
Ian,
too.
oh, you guys are great. So Frank, and Ian all licensed in New York and New Jersey, because we are dual licensed. So some of our agents are primarily New York, which
And could I ask of each of you to type your name, your full name, Felix, people want to know what your last name is, and how they reach you, either email, phone number, put it in the chat.
You want us to put that in the chat?
yeah, go
Yes,
ahead and
please.
put that in the chat, please. Also on that question, I mean, it's off the questions, but does anybody speak any other languages? Because that was a really good point. Speaking Russian to be able to service Russian speaking clients is definitely important. Do you have any other languages that we need to expose?
Broken Spanish.
Okay, that works, right? And Felix, I do want to say that whether it's people or tools, creating systems is really important. So whether you're doing it through systems and technology, or you're doing it through people, the business can be built, right? It could be one person with leveraging through tools. So thank you, different styles. All right, let's jump into some questions. And I said, if you guys have any questions, you want to put it in the chat, we'll make sure that your questions do get answered. But going to the first question that I sent you all is, setting expectations is a success strategy in business. I mean, especially in today's market, what is the most important conversation our agents can be having with our clients, whether it's on the buy side or the sell side? Like, what should they not be doing and what should they be talking about? What is the most important conversation they should be talking about with clients right now? Would anybody like to take that one?
Sure. I personally, on the sales side, I think in today's market, they certainly have the upper hand, the sellers, right? And their expectations are, if you price a property properly, right, you should be getting multiple bid situations, not only because you're priced right, but also because there's a lack of inventory, right? So, at least on the deals that I've seen when I'm representing sellers, there's usually at least 8 to 10 or above offers that are being entertained. So, from a seller standpoint, I think you drive the market, and, if you're interested in selling, price it right. Don't get ahead of yourself in terms of what you think, you should be getting, and let the market come to you. From a buyer standpoint, I think that you need to speak to them about the fact that they got to be prepared for bidding wars. And, a lot of buyers are getting frustrated today because even if they do have a signed contract, and we're not out of attorney review as quick as possible, then, there's a great likelihood that the seller is entertaining other offers. And, I'll give you a perfect example. I have a gentleman who I'm representing right now. He's a vet, and he's doing a VA loan. So he's financing 100% of the purchase price, including closing costs, what have you. He's now gotten that bid on 3 different transactions. And it's really not because he's not offering enough money. It's because I think people are just getting scared by the fact that he's financing 100% of the purchase price. So now he's, changed course after being outbid for the 3rd time. He's now coming out of pocket money and, looking to finance less, but, putting down, 5 percentage points of the purchase price. And I think that will lead to success. Again, great, not the greatest looking thing financially, right, for a buyer, but better than 100%. So I think from a buyer standpoint, you have to try and make yourself as attractive as possible to a seller. Now, does that mean waiving certain things, mortgage contingencies, appraisal contingencies, what have you? I mean, these are all risks that they need to understand.
Okay.
And I think the biggest thing on the buyer side in today's market is appraisal, right? The appraisal issue becomes paramount because the market is moving faster than counties are recording documents, and what appraisers are, coming back with value-wise. So,
Yeah.
while somebody might be willing to pay a premium because of the lack of inventory, there may be an issue on the financing side, especially if they're financing a high loan to value.
Great. So, thank you. Could someone else speak to that point about what kind of conversation would one of our agents have with that seller about the appraisal? What have you seen before? What is happening in the market of appraisals?
If everyone's okay, I'll take
Go
that
ahead,
one.
Ian.
I have to tell you, in the last several deals that I have been retained to represent either on the buy side or the sell side, the appraisal contingency seems to be the #1 hot button item. It's coming up constantly now. And, it really is, to Felix's point, one of the ways that the buyers are trying to distinguish themselves from, other competitive bids. And there are a whole host of unintended consequences that come with, a buyer's decision to waive the appraisal contingency. And I think that, the agents, in conjunction with the attorney who's brought on later, obviously, can do a lot to manage expectations of that, the buyer particularly, by explaining what those consequences are, how that will affect the overall transaction if, they make a decision to waive the appraisal contingency.
So, I mean, let's talk about what that means. I think, Frank Uzi, you have something to add to that?
Well, I was going to say, I think this is a very, hot button topic right now. But, what I would stress is there has to be transparency when you're doing this. I mean, what we're seeing a lot and what causes a tremendous amount of frustration is, we'll get a contract, let's say, representing the seller, and it comes in and they say, look, multiple offers, the buyer waived the appraisal. And we get into attorney review, and then buyer's counsel walks that back and says, well, my client needs the appraisal. If they don't get the appraisal, we still have the mortgage contingency. So what's the difference? The point is here, and I think some of it is lost at the contract negotiation level before it ever hits counsel's desk. The point here is if you're waiving the appraisal, that buyer better have the money to write a check if it doesn't appraise and the mortgage amount drops, because I can assure you in my office, and I'm sure, my co-counsel on this panel's office, we're going to call that out. We're going to say, hey, look, you waived the appraisal. That didn't mean that, well, if it doesn't appraise and I don't get the mortgage, I walk away. The point is you're getting a mortgage. An appraisal is a component of the mortgage. It's a function and a necessity. But if it doesn't hit value, you have the capital to make up that difference in cash for any shortfall in the mortgage amount. And I think that transparency is lost. And when it's sorted out in attorney review, it sometimes gets a little contentious because sellers feel the buyer's getting a second bite at the apple. They knocked out 5, 6, 10 other offers, coming in over asking, waiving the appraisal, and then walking it back and going, well, if it doesn't appraise, then you're going to have to lower the price. Well, that wasn't fair, to the other offers you knocked out of the box. So I would certainly add a little bit of time, and effort made to just make sure everyone's on that same page.
So when you're saying that, what I'm hearing is, and I know Sally would be in agreement with me, is that negotiation is happening between the agents, between the clients when you're writing the contract. What Frank and Ian are both saying, now they're getting the contract. Whatever's in the contract, we've negotiated. That's what the buyers said they were agreeing to. But what I'm hearing is then they go, yeah, but legally, I could get my mortgage commitment to not be able to issue because the appraisal didn't come through. So legally, I could back out of this. Now, the reality is it could be all messy and yeah, the deal could die. But to the agents that are listening, how well do you think that agent that you just did that to is going to receive the next offer that you bring to them and the next client? And then when you have a listing, how are they going to take you seriously as a listing agent if this is how you behave?
Yeah,
So
I'm sorry, Marybeth.
Yeah.
I was just going to say it's devastating to the relationship, which is,
yeah,
which is really what we as the real estate attorneys on these deals, cherish and value so much. But, in terms of the walking it back, as Frank was describing, that's a real thing. It happens all the time. And these attorneys, either they have not communicated with the agent up front, or they're engaging in some degree of bad faith in doing that, where they're essentially circumventing their client's original agreement and relying on the mortgage contingency to get their client to back out of the deal when it doesn't appraise.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your stance on that because it really does. It makes us feel comfortable that you would be reminding the client that there's some integrity to what you put on this paper here. Frank?
Well, I
Chambron?
think what's important, I think Frank, Uzi hit the nail on the head, but it's obviously very, very important to educate your client. And the whole purpose of attorney review is to make sure that the buyer especially knows what they agreed to. And there's a lot of consequences to waiving an appraisal contingency. And sometimes when you do explain it to the buyer, it's not necessarily what they thought. And, just because you waive the appraisal and then they think they're going to backdoor, terminate because of the appraisal, I really have to have a conversation about what it means to have to make up, to put down.
Right, can you explain it as you would explain it to a client when I say, yeah, well, my agent made me sign this. It sounded good. I'm waiving appraisal, but what does that mean?
No, I just make sure that they understand that very clearly, that if their lender comes in with a value that's, substantially less than the purchase price, that they better have the liquid assets to make a bigger down payment. If they don't, then I think before, you get out of attorney review, obviously, that's something that has to be addressed. And a lot of times I do talk to a buyer and they didn't think that far ahead. And it really cuts into their reserves and their ability to get a mortgage, not maybe because of the appraisal, but because of their debt to income or because they won't have sufficient reserves to satisfy an underwriter. So it's very important to have those discussions with a buyer, especially a first-time buyer who has no idea what they're getting themselves into.
And they
So
emotionally signed,
yeah.
right? They emotionally, because they
Exactly.
looked at all these houses and they finally got one and they're just going to do whatever they got to do.
Exactly. Finally got one. I hear that a lot.
Right.
If I may jump in as the broker, I think it's also our agent's responsibility to really explain, as Frank just said, what that means. I have a fear that too many agents are saying, oh, well, let's waive the appraisal, let's waive the inspections, not really having the client understand what that means. And when they find out from their attorney, it kind of lessens their relationship with you or their trust in you because you made them think they could just do this. So keep that in mind too.
And if I may interject, Sally, one of the other things that we've kind of been successful with to a certain degree is when we have this appraisal issue and it comes up after a contract is signed, and gentlemen, jump in if you don't agree, but we try to maybe work in a range of value. When speaking to a buyer and we crunch numbers and we come up with an idea of what they may need to come up with in terms of dollars and cents, if an appraisal, let's say we have a contract that's 500,000, right? But they know that if they have to put up extra money, the lowest possible appraised value could be 480. Then we try to work in that range in the appraisal language, just to give it a little bit of a buffer. Again, not the greatest thing to do, but certainly somewhat of a compromise.
And Felix, if I could just clarify for that would be that they're going to waive the appraisal up. The appraisal would have to come in at 480 or better.
Correct.
Or
right.
480 or better for them to move forward.
Correct. It's not objectionable. Anything between the 500 and 480, anything below 480 becomes, an objectionable item, usually up to what we have on the lower side. Okay.
So now, besides the appraisal conversation, I guess, is there something else that our clients should definitely be speaking with their clients? I mean, our agents should be speaking with their clients about in today's market, things that you're seeing that's coming down the pipe. And like Frank, you said, then they get to you and they're like, oh, I didn't even think about that.
Inspections.
The inspection, there's so many things that can happen with an inspection, but we're over the years, we started with mold, and then it was always oil tanks. And now, one of the big things we see is when a seller has a decommissioned oil tank and it's in the ground and they have all the right permits. Yep. And I have to explain to a buyer that, in 1998, that was perfectly acceptable. And a lot of people did it that way. It was a little less expensive. But what's underneath the tank, we don't know. And I had a client, and one of the, I guess, one of the crazier closings we had, to answer that question, I'll jump ahead, is I convinced, and Frank, it was your deal.
Don't remind me, I had blocked that from my memory.
I explained to them that just because the seller had all the right paperwork, when you take it out, you don't know what you're going to find. And sure enough, the seller agreed to take it out. And not only was there contamination, but there was groundwater contamination. And
Oh, gosh.
Frank's clients, I felt terrible. They spent, I think, $70,000 cleaning it up. So, now I'm seeing a lot of sewer. The sewer systems in northern New Jersey especially are aging. They're from the 60s. You're doing these sewer inspections and they're doing the video.
Right.
We're finding obstruction. That is a very expensive fix when it needs to be fixed. So I just think you have to have educate your clients. And that's always the theme, is make sure they know every aspect of the contract, all of the contingencies, and really what it means. So that's, I think, very important.
Yeah, please.
Ed, can I
It's
add
not
to that?
not just educating your buyers, but you need to educate your sellers. If they
Yes.
have a decommissioned oil tank, if they're connected to sewer, explain these things could happen. These
Yeah.
will get checked. Most attorneys will ask you to remove that oil tank.
Absolutely right.
And I can speak on both of those as a personal experience. I was one of those sellers who had the decommissioned tank when I bought it in 2005, and it was fine. And then when my buyer was buying, his attorney advised, I know you said you don't want the tank pulled, but I really think you should pull the tank. And it only cost about $7,000 for me because there wasn't much of a contamination, but there was a contamination. And that's on that one. And on the sewer line, a lot of sellers don't understand that they're responsible all the way out to the street.
Right.
So I have one house, it was a $40,000 sewer line that I would have had to put in and rip up my whole front yard just to connect to that main, and it would have had to have been fixed. Lucky enough, it was just toilet paper. Thank God.
If I just to piggyback on that, and I think this goes back to what we had said earlier, it's making sure people understand, the reality of a situation. And in the contract Frank spoke about, the contract was written that there's an underground storage tank and it's going to stay in place and the buyer doesn't need to check it and there's nothing to worry about. And I had, a discussion with the agent and the client. They said, this is what we're putting out there and we have a buyer coming in. And I said, well, look, that's fine. But the reality of this is that it's wishful thinking, because any counsel that's going to get this contract that knows what they're doing is going to advise their client, hey, you're taking on a tremendous risk here. And they said, well, what do you think the odds are? I said, well, let's see who the buyer's counsel is. And, truth be told, they came in, I saw it was Frank's office, and I said, I got news for you. Those odds just went down with you getting to shield the buyer from checking this liability. But, this is why, listen, this is why, and there's no right or wrong here. It's not a foolproof process, and there are risks when you're buying real estate. But this is why the most important thing I tell people is, if you take nothing away when you're making your decision, is there are real estate attorneys in this area that know each other in practice, and we're here for a reason, and it's because we know what we're doing. So, the friends and family plan should be for your cell phone. So when you get that's what I tell all the agents. When someone goes, I got a friend, his cousin is an attorney. Look, no, you need a local real estate attorney, because if you don't, you may think you got a smooth deal, but in the example we talked about, that buyer would have blindly walked into a $70,000 liability that rightfully they shouldn't have inherited. So
That's right.
Good counsel is always a necessity.
Yeah, that's a good point. If I may, just on these points, I think it's really important on the sell side, for the seller to understand that if certain items come up in an inspection, a roof, an oil tank, what have you, those items will have to be disclosed on a future disclosure if the current deal falls apart.
Thank you.
And so, to me, that's something I've seen several times recently, particularly in this feeding frenzy of a market that we're in right now, where sellers need to be mindful of the fact that if if the deal falls apart because of an inspection item, because they were being stubborn and drew a line in the sand around certain items in a report, they're going to have to disclose those later, assuming, of course, they're honest people. And then on the buy side, I think buyers need to understand that they are buying the house as is, and that if something comes up in an inspection, the seller is going to decide yay or nay, whether or not they want to repair or give a concession or credit of some kind at closing. Otherwise, take it or leave it. I think, for buyers to understand that concept would be very helpful as they, enter into these transactions.
Mhm.
And also,
So-
and
So
so-
far,
also expectations, I think, Ian, just to jump in, a little bit further on what you were saying, most people are buying, are making an investment that's probably their biggest investment that they're making in their lifetime, right? Especially first-time buyers, right? So they need to understand, especially when they're at the lower, price points of the market, they're not buying new homes, right? So there's going to be issues, right? And explaining to a buyer in terms of managing their expectations, hey, the roof may be 20 years old, but if it's not leaking, we're not really going to be able to object to it, right? Because good attorneys, right, they take out that provision by saying, hey, age is not objectionable provided that it's functioning. Same idea with, mechanicals, boilers, furnaces, whatever that is. So as long as, you can prepare them for that, then it makes the transaction less emotional than it needs to be.
You nailed it, Felix. You nailed it. Taking the emotion out of these transactions is so important at like those early phases in particular. But on the inspection piece, it's why we sit down with our clients, the buyers, and go through the process and the inspection report right off the bat, and we have those conversations with them about what to expect when we go to the seller with a list of repairs on items that are merely old and not actually in need of replacement at that particular time. You're not going to get a seller to agree to replace your roof just because it's 20 years old, or your furnace or your sump pump or what have you. So it's a good point, Felix.
So also just to mention is the seller's disclosure that you mentioned, Ian, for our agents. You do need to tell your sellers, like, if a deal were to fall apart and there are things on that report that came through and that's why it fell apart, that seller needs to disclose it in a new seller's disclosure. A new seller's disclosure must be uploaded to our MLS for the documents in our .loop. So there is no hiding behind that. And if one buyer finds it and is not going to move forward, what makes you think Mr. Seller, another buyer, is going to be okay and move forward? In this market may be crazy, but once their emotions go away and logic starts to kick in, that's where you have a challenge. And the other thing I just want to say before Sally asks the next question is, you're supposed to take the emotion out of it. I've heard from agents, 17 years, agents will say, well, the attorney's so cut and dry. They're trying to kill my deal. No, they're not trying to kill your deal. Listen to these guys. They're showing, here's your legal obligation. You're in a legal contract, Mr. Buyer or Seller. Here's what it says, and here's what your liabilities are and your risk. And I'm just gonna, expose you to what you're putting yourself liable for, and then the client is making decisions. So I just want our agents to hear that you need to be in partnership with your attorneys and you need to let them do their job, but you need to support them by teeing up that contract with all of these discussions prior to handing them over the contract.
So so far we've been talking about home inspections and waiving appraisals. Now we'd love to ask you if you have seen any creative tactics, any creative things written onto a contract that helped a buyer win a contract. I saw something that was obviously a joke on Facebook, but it said, like, you could try writing in, we'll pay for 4 years of college for your firstborn. Obviously that's a little extreme, but have you guys seen anything written into a contract that you felt, hey, that is really creative and a great idea?
I mean, I've seen letters submitted with offers, which, I don't know,
We
if
don't
that,
love letters, Felix. We don't love letters.
no, I mean, I don't know if that helps, people win or lose. I mean, I think some of the letters that I've seen are, a little bit out there, but, at the end of the day.
Well, and there's a bigger problem with that, which has recently really been stressed to us by National Association of Realtors. There's a fair housing pitfall in using those letters, because people are talking about children and families, and sometimes they're talking about certain holidays, which reveals what their religion is. None of that can be in one of those love letters. If you want to
Pictures
say
of the clients, and then you have
Okay.
everything.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Pictures
Yeah.
of their dogs and all that stuff.
so, we have told our realtors, cool it on the love letters.
One of
Yeah.
the things I like that I've seen, and it's very simple, is, you see it a lot: major structural, mechanical, environmental, and then some agents are adding the word "and safety issues." Makes the seller feel good, gets the offer accepted, and then really when you're dealing with your buyer, safety can mean almost anything. That's important.
Mm.
Now, I always tell my client, if you're not going to buy a house because there's a loose doorknob, we're not off to a good start. But it really makes psychologically, I think it makes the deal palatable for the seller, because they're thinking it's only major issues, which is true.
So
and
can you
safety
repeat
issues.
that verbiage again? Where are you seeing it in the contractual provisions?
In paragraph 43,
Mhm.
buyer's inspections limited to major structural, mechanical, environmental, and safety. And usually in my review letter, I'll put structural shall be deemed to include the roof, so that really everything's covered. But on the same hand, the seller knows you have a serious buyer, and I think it's a fair clause. It allows the buyer to do a meaningful inspection, to get out of the deal if there's something substantially wrong with the house that the seller won't address, and the seller at the same time, they're protected, because their buyer's not going to cancel the deal because there's no GFCI outlet in the kitchen. So, I love when somebody wants to when I'm dealing with one of my colleagues here, and we're having a weak discussion on an $800,000 house over a $200 repair. It's almost it's sometimes it's funny, but so I do like that in paragraph 43, when we're limiting the inspections to really the important things.
Awesome.
Just to jump in, something else that I've seen that I think, is helpful for a seller, if there is a mortgage contingency, is, ordering the appraisal sooner than later. Doing that within 10 days of conclusion of attorney review, or within 5 days of, conclusion of inspection contingencies, what have you, just to try to move things along, only because we know banks are, backed up a little bit with the volume that they have. And, by the time they get in the queue to get the appraisal done, it could be, a couple weeks thereafter. And, if you're finding out about an appraisal issue or what have you 30 days down the road, it certainly helps if it's, a couple weeks earlier, in case the deal dies and you can put the place back on the market sooner.
But the realtor can't really put that into the contract, right?
Well,
Because
I mean,
the realtor doesn't order the
no,
appraisal.
but if the buyer is willing to order the appraisal sooner than later, it could
Okay.
be a provision that's put in the contract.
Okay.
One of the things I like, piggybacking on what Felix was just saying regarding the mortgage, or the appraisal and the mortgage contingency, and we touched on it earlier, how you have attorneys or parties who are trying to circumvent the waiver of the appraisal contingency by relying on a mortgage contingency. I recently put a provision for one of my seller clients into the mortgage contingency in a rider that, to the extent the lender denies the application, a bad appraisal can't be one of those reasons for canceling the contract under the mortgage contingency. So I kind of like that, because, it protected my seller client from, that exact attempt to end run around the waiver of the appraisal and rely on the mortgage contingency.
Mhm. Okay. How about buyers and sellers that sellers that have to buy? How are you guys wording, the seller that needs to go buy something that there's a contingency? Is there anything special that you're doing in those contracts when they're putting their purchase contracts out?
If a seller is buying,
Mm-hmm. So if a seller is buying and now they have a buyer, is there language in the contract that just says that they need to find firm relocation, number one? And on the second is when they're buying something and the seller has, or the buyer has a contingency, how are you seeing people getting around that? Are you seeing bridge loans or home equity lines, or how are they gapping that?
well,
Well, there's-
go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead,
So,
Bill.
go ahead, Frank, you jump in, go ahead.
All right, thank you. So I was going to say that, this has kind of become more prevalent now because it's such a strong seller's market.
Yes.
So, for the most part, that generally didn't have a very good chance of getting entertained until the market really turned, that buyers were so desperate, they were kind of willing to sit around it and wait to see if a seller can actually relocate. But, what a lot of people have to remember is in this market, your seller is now becoming the buyer, right? So they're putting themselves now in the pool where they're competing with 12 other people or more for every house the second it hits the market. So, it becomes very tenuous, right? I mean, it to some degree, it almost makes the paper the contract's written on not worth it, right? Because you have a seller that says, hey, I need 30 days to find a new place to live, right? And a lot of times we say, okay, you have a home purchase contingency. And someone says, well, I'll wait 30 days. But, remember, 30 days is not enough time for this seller to go out and complete a purchase. They're just trying to put something under contract. They still have to get through, their inspections, their mortgage. So, that contingency period could really drag out. What we try to do is bridge that gap with like a use and occupancy agreement and say, look, let's not try to end it with a termination. We try to restructure that and say, look, let's build in some extensions. Let's say if the seller needs to extend the closing date, we'll let them extend up to a certain time.
Okay.
If they still haven't found something after X amount of days of extension, maybe we'll close and let the seller stay in possession under use and occupancy. So we try to sculpt that so that it doesn't end in a termination if we can.
Okay. I love it.
And that's a great point, Frank, with the use and occupancy. I mean, it certainly has its own pitfalls, obviously, but when you're a buyer and you're trying to be as accommodating as possible to a seller, you start running into issues, and that's why Frank is raising the issue with the use and occupancy, because you have interest rates blocks that you have to be concerned with. Especially now, rates are starting to tick up, and if you don't close, it's going to cost you in rate lock extension fees, or if you don't want to pay the rate lock extension fees, you're going to be paying a higher interest rate. But if I'm a seller and I have a buyer that's on the hook, I'm trying to make sure that I have other options. We just did a closing for a woman down the shore, and she's in contract to buy new construction, but she's in contract to sell her place. We're actually closing tomorrow. So she's going to have about 4 or 5 months of needing to live somewhere. And I was like, look, sell your place, get your money in your pocket, and figure out a short-term rental situation, because it's most important to sell your place. Put your money in your pocket, and then find something else. But it's hard. It's a very hard thing, in my opinion. When you're juggling between buyers, selling, sellers, buying. I mean, it can get very complicated. Hard thing to coordinate.
Yeah. Frank Chambron, I have a question in the chat about land. Can a non-citizen purchase U.S. land to build new construction?
Yeah, I mean, selling is maybe a little different with FERPTA issues, but I'm not aware of a restriction that would prevent a non-U.S. citizen from buying land in America. I mean, there's certainly enough foreign investment that goes on in this area to, I think, to support what I said. Again, there's issues when you sell for FERPTA, which is the foreign investors, there's a form we fill out at every closing, but I don't believe there's a restriction for purchasers.
Okay, thank you. That's for Amal. And I know she's got family in Egypt. And the other question we had was, could somebody just be very clear on what would the language need to say inside the contract if they're going to waive the appraisal or a portion of the appraisal? What do you like for that language to say?
Well, you can, I mean, essentially, it depends exactly what we're doing. If the appraisal is being waived, you know, essentially what the language, you're not waiving the event, right? The bank is going to require an appraisal. So the language will say something along the lines of, you know, this contract and closing is not contingent upon an appraisal at the contract price. And then we kind of tie it off essentially, you know, I'm summarizing saying, you know, in the event it appraises less than the contract price, the buyer has sufficient capital to infuse any necessary funds needed to make up the contract price. And if the mortgage is denied due to the appraisal, that's not a valid reason to back out under the mortgage contingency. So you have to kind of close it from both ends. What Felix had said earlier about if we're putting a threshold in, then that just simply modifies to say, you know, the contract is a contingent on it appraising at X dollars and not the full contract price, so that there's a minimum appraisal amount that's required.
Contract is contingent on a property appraising at X amount of dollars and not the contract price.
Correct. If you're having that conflict.
No less than.
Right.
No less than 480 and not the contract price.
Just say no less than, you know, I don't think you need to put in the language about the contract price. Just say no
less than 480.
Correct.
Gotcha. Thank you. That was a specific question. All right. So craziest contracts. What have you seen in this weird time?
Transactions or contracts?
Transactions. No, contracts. Either way. Just what are you seeing that just yeah, right?
Today in today's market, I think it's the majority of them, truthfully. You know, but Frank Uzi and I had a very interesting one, where we both had very I should say interesting clients.
Yeah.
Yes, interesting is a good word. We like to use interesting.
But we had a seller on Frank's side who was very indecisive about whether or not she wanted to sell and buy. We did have some significant inspection issues, one of which being a septic system that needed to be replaced. And Frank, jump in if I'm wrong on anything that I'm saying. Obviously, the municipality needed to see a functioning code compliant septic system in order to issue a CCO. And given what was discovered during inspections, that was not going to happen. So we had to work around that issue, which we did. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed. Not with Frank and I, but with our clients. But my clients also had, at the inception, we had to deal with a flood zone issue. My clients wanted to put in a pool in the backyard. So all of this was, you know, disclosed up front, but we had to do a lot of homework, a lot of working around to get through initial due diligence issues. And then when we finally did go through those due diligence issues, we had to deal with the psychosis of clients that, you know, wanted to close, didn't want to close, you know, were threatening to kill deals. And it was...
Did we close?
We did.
Yay.
We did. But it was certainly an adventure.
Yes, certainly the contracts don't tend to be crazy. It's people that tend to be crazy. And, you know, look, when you're going through it, it's not pleasant, but, you know, now we laugh about it. So, you know, we closed that deal. I had another fantastic one with Frank Chambron. So, you know, by process of elimination, I said earlier, Ian's next. So the next crazy deal I'll have to have.
Looking forward to it, Frank. It'll be fun.
I'm sure we could procure that with our agents somehow. It's nice to hear though that it's nice to hear that you guys work through it though, and I like that you say, like, hey, we could laugh about it now. Sometimes we can't really take ourselves so seriously. We do have to let clients make their decisions and kind of just guide them through it. And at the end of the day, they'll make the right decision for themselves. And sometimes I say they're not going to kill the deal over this. Like, just let them sleep on it and let them get over their emotions and feelings and come back tomorrow. Yes, Felix.
I just, you know, to touch base, to go back about trying to make deals smoother. You know, one of the other transactions that I mentioned that we're finally closing tomorrow with this woman that was buying and selling. So this property that she's selling has a sewer easement in the backyard. She doesn't have a very large piece of property. but she has a sewer easement. So it's not a utility easement, right? I would think when I first saw the survey that it is a utility easement, but it's more than that. Like that easement prevents anybody from building onto that land because they have to, if in the event of an issue, they have to get under the land, right? They'd have to dig up. So you can't put a pool, you can't put an addition, you can't put any type of structures that's not movable. And, we lost a few transactions. The first transaction that we lost on this was because it wasn't properly disclosed. So what we started doing is we started submitting the copy of my client's survey with the seller's disclosure. So I think that no, and again, this is, more of a legal thing than a real estate thing, but, understanding and knowing what restrictions are out there, especially if you're using a seller's disclosure, which, some people do the right thing and some people don't do the right thing. But at the end of the day, it's important to know, if you're a seller's broker, just to know, hey, this is what I know from the municipality, and to put it out there. And to make sure that the attorney that's representing the seller is aware of that, because sometimes people don't even know. My client, when she bought, she knew that there was something in the backyard, but she didn't really think about it because she never decided to build or do anything. But the reality is, if people are looking at her backyard and they want to extend out, they're not going to be able to.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat that I think would be a good one to get the answer. Any advice you can give regarding dual agency, specifically when the agent is representing both the seller and the buyer?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sally. It is so important. I think Frank Uzi was talking about transparency earlier, and when you talk about dual agency, particularly the buyers need to understand that, when they're going to go with the listing agent as their agent and buying the property, they have to understand what that actually means. We were talking earlier about the first-time home buyer who doesn't really know much about anything relating to buying a home. They need to understand that there is an apparent conflict of interest there, and what that means to the future of this transaction, and the risks involved for that buyer in entering into an arrangement like that. Now, of course, there are ways to sort of buffer that apparent conflict, and all of those should be explained and disclosed to the buyer before he or she or they sign off on that kind of arrangement.
Yep, thank you. And there is, to the agent that asked that question, I mean, if Sally's the broker inside of your office that you're in, could assist you with the conversations that need to be had with either client. So if you feel like you're in a situation that you don't know how to navigate those waters, I'm urging you to talk to your broker inside your office and to get some guidance on that, because we never want to put the client in jeopardy, and then of course put your license in jeopardy.
I would like to add too to that effect. When there is dual agency, it inevitably creates a question in a buyer or seller's mind: is my agent loyal to me? And they may not say it. Many people are not confrontational or outspoken, or they just don't want to sour a relationship. But it is said quite frequently to attorneys, even when we have a good relationship with the agent. I mean, it'll come out and say, look, I know so-and-so, but, I kind of feel like I want to bounce this off you because they're also talking to the buyer or also talking to the seller. So, listen, is it nice to have both sides? Listen, I mean, we do this to make money, and I recognize that. But, sometimes you can't wear two hats, right? Attorneys don't do it. We won't do it, right? And we're asked to do it all the time. The friendly deal, will you take the buyer and the seller? No, I won't, because inevitably I have to make a decision that's better for one side and not the other. So, my advice is, I know dual agency is great. If we're going to be truthful, just don't do it. Refer it out. Why put yourself in that position? One client that's happy with you will tell 100 people. One client that's not happy with you will tell 100,000 people that you didn't do the right thing. So, it's a law of averages.
And also be very careful with the communication. I have a broker who just came to me to represent them in litigation. They were a dual agent. The buyer never paid the deposit, and up to the day of closing breached. They actually trying to flip the property. I had nothing to do with the transaction. And the seller is suing everybody, including the broker, because the broker didn't follow up with the buyer to make sure they paid the deposit. So you're wearing a lot of hats in that situation. You just have to be very, very careful with your communication and your diligence.
And it's interesting, this is coming up more and more because due to the fierceness of the market that we're in, there are many people who call the listing agent thinking that that's going to give them an in with the seller. So we're seeing this happening more and more where people say, I only want to deal with the listing agent. They don't understand what that means.
Awesome.
Right.
All right. So is there anything, we're about at the top of the hour, and I appreciate your time. I think what I'm thinking, Sally, is I'd like to get each and every one of them individually on a conversation inside the lobby so our agents can get a little more up and personal with each of them. Guys are great attorneys. Is there anything that you would like to add that we didn't cover that you feel is important for the agents to know, either about the market or about yourself? Last words.
Hard to ask an attorney if they have any last words.
You should never do that, Marybeth.
Well, you're also talkative right now. Come on,
Yeah.
let's go.
That's because we're all going to bill you hourly, so wait till you get to
Thank
I
you.
don't. I have a stack of attorney reviews that I have to continue with.
Awesome.
So
Great.
if
Anybody else?
I don't have anything else.
Okay, thank you so much, guys. This was really helpful. I know everybody got a lot out of it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank
And
you.
we'll be sure to get the video and post it out, as well as how for our agents to get in touch with all of you to refer deals over. One more thing I did want to mention is that all of our attorneys here do work with Carnegie Title. And I think that being able to work with a professional A team is one of the successes that we see with top agents. So, you know, each of the attorneys here could represent different clients that you may feel that they are a better match for. But just know that we have you supported between here, title, insurance, and also our lenders. So thank you so much for your time, and let us know if we can help you in any way.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.